Chosen one, there is a moment in many people's lives when something inside them begins to shift quietly. It is not always a dramatic change. It often begins with a simple decision to protect your peace, to stop reacting to every comment, to stop explaining yourself to people who were never really trying to understand you in the first place. At first, the change feels small. You answer fewer messages. You spend more time reflecting before responding. You stop absorbing emotional chaos that used to drain your energy. Gradually, your words become fewer, your reactions calmer, and your presence more grounded. But almost inevitably, the moment others notice this transformation, a familiar label appears. Some people look at you and say the same thing. You have become cold. What they once described as patience and kindness suddenly receives a new interpretation. The calmness that now defines your behavior is no longer seen as wisdom, but as distance.
And for many chosen ones, that accusation can feel confusing at first. You may find yourself wondering how protecting your peace could possibly be mistaken for indifference. The truth is that what people call coldness is often something entirely different. It is the visible sign of growth. When a person begins to mature emotionally and spiritually, their behavior changes naturally. The constant need to respond disappears. The habit of over-explaining fades away. The urge to tolerate every form of disrespect begins to weaken. Instead of reacting impulsively, you begin choosing your responses carefully. Instead of absorbing everyone else's emotions, you start recognizing that your energy is something valuable that cannot be given away endlessly. This transformation often feels peaceful from the inside, but from the outside, it can look unfamiliar to people who were accustomed to the earlier version of you. In the past, you may have been available to everyone at all times.
You answered messages immediately. You listened to every complaint. You tried to solve problems that were never yours to carry. Because you offered so much patience and emotional availability, people built expectations around that behavior. Your constant presence became part of their routine. They assumed the same access to your time, attention, and emotional support would always remain available. But when growth begins, those expectations start to change. The version of you that once tolerated everything slowly disappears. Not because you stopped caring, but because you began understanding the importance of balance. You realized that kindness does not require sacrificing your peace. Compassion does not require accepting manipulation. Respect for others must exist alongside respect for yourself. When you start living according to that understanding, the dynamic of many relationships changes immediately. And that change is often what people interpret as coldness.
What they are actually experiencing is the absence of the old version of you.
The person who once explained everything now speaks less. The person who once tolerated constant emotional demands now creates space. The person who once tried to maintain harmony at any cost now recognizes that peace cannot exist without boundaries. These adjustments are signs of emotional maturity. Yet, to someone who benefited from the earlier dynamic, they can feel uncomfortable or even threatening. Instead of acknowledging that you have grown, some people choose a simpler explanation. They call the change coldness, because that label allows them to avoid examining the deeper reason for the shift. Yet, transformation is often part of a larger spiritual process. Growth rarely happens without a change in mindset. The Bible speaks about this transformation clearly in the book of Romans, describing how a renewed mind leads to a renewed way of living.
When God begins reshaping your perspective, the way you respond to people naturally evolves.
Situations that once triggered emotional reactions no longer control you in the same way. You become more patient with yourself and more discerning with others. Your priorities shift toward purpose rather than constant approval. From the inside, this transformation feels like clarity, but from the outside, it can look unfamiliar to those who preferred the earlier version of you. That is why the label of coldness often appears at the exact moment growth becomes visible. People who are comfortable with the old dynamic may feel unsettled by the new one. They interpret your silence as distance, your calmness as indifference, and your boundaries as rejection. But what they are actually witnessing is a transition. You are no longer living from constant reaction. You are learning to live from clarity, from purpose, and from a deeper alignment with the direction God is shaping in your life.
And once that process begins, the way others interpret your transformation can reveal more about their expectations than about your character. Because when someone calls growth coldness, it often means they miss something they once had access to. Chosen one. Once the label appears and people begin describing your change as coldness, the deeper reason behind their reaction slowly becomes clearer. What many people are responding to is not actually your attitude or your heart. What they are reacting to is the loss of the access they once had to you. Access is one of the quiet foundations of many relationships. It is the unspoken understanding that someone will always be available, always ready to respond, always willing to listen and carry emotional weight that may not even belong to them. In the past, you may have been that person. You responded quickly when someone needed to talk. You explained your thoughts in detail even when the other person had already misunderstood you. You listened to problems that repeated again and again without real change. Your patience created a space where others could unload frustration, confusion, or insecurity without much resistance. Because you carried that emotional availability so naturally, people began to expect it without questioning it. Your presence became something constant in their routine. They did not think about how much energy it required from you to maintain that level of openness. They simply assumed it would always remain there. Over time, that assumption slowly shapes the expectations within a relationship. The moment someone believes they have unlimited access to your attention, your time, and your emotional support, they begin to treat that access as something ordinary. It becomes part of the structure of their life, rather than something valuable they consciously appreciate. That is why the shift becomes so noticeable when growth begins. When you start protecting your time more carefully, answering messages less frequently, and stepping away from conversations that drain your energy, the structure they were used to begins to disappear. The constant availability they once relied on is no longer there. The emotional reassurance they expected does not arrive in the same way. The explanations they once demanded are replaced by silence or simplicity. For someone who built expectations around your accessibility, this shift can feel like distance. They experience the absence of the old dynamic and interpret it through the only language that makes sense to them. Instead of recognizing the change as growth, they describe it as coldness. The label becomes a way to explain the discomfort they feel when unlimited access suddenly disappears. But what they are really missing is not your kindness. It is the constant availability that allowed them to reach you whenever they needed something. Emotional access is one of the most valuable things a person can give another human being. It means allowing someone into your thoughts, your time, and your emotional space. When you offer that access freely and consistently, it creates a powerful bond. But if that access exists without boundaries, it can slowly become something people depend on more than they realize. They may not see the emotional investment required to maintain it. They simply experience the benefit of always being able to reach you. When growth begins, that dynamic naturally changes. Protecting your peace requires being selective with your time and attention. It means recognizing that your emotional energy is not unlimited and cannot be given away to every situation that demands it. This awareness often comes after years of feeling overwhelmed by the expectations others placed on you. Eventually, you realize that constantly carrying the emotional burdens of other people leaves little space for your own growth, reflection, and purpose. That realization leads to small but important adjustments. You begin responding less impulsively,
you stop explaining every decision. You no longer feel responsible for resolving every conflict that appears in your environment. These changes may feel healthy and balanced from your perspective, but from the perspective of someone who is used to unrestricted access, the difference feels dramatic. The messages they once received immediately now arrive later or not at all. The long explanations they expected are replaced by brief clarity. The emotional support they relied on now appears only when it aligns with your own peace and priorities. To them, the connection feels colder because it no longer revolves around their expectations. In reality, the warmth of your character has not disappeared.
What has disappeared is the habit of overextending yourself. This distinction is important because many chosen ones begin questioning themselves when they hear the word cold repeated by others. They wonder if growth has somehow made them less compassionate. But protecting your time and emotional space does not erase compassion. It simply ensures that compassion remains genuine rather than exhausted. When kindness exists without boundaries, it eventually becomes unsustainable. When kindness exists alongside wisdom, it becomes something steadier and more authentic. Yet access is only the first layer of the reaction people have toward your transformation. Beneath the loss of emotional availability lies another deeper shift that affects certain individuals even more strongly. Because some relationships were not only built on access, they were built on the ability to influence your reactions, your emotions, and sometimes even your decisions. And when your growth begins removing that influence, the response can become far more intense than simply calling you cold. Chosen one. After the loss of access becomes visible, another deeper layer of the reaction begins to appear. For some people, the discomfort they feel is not only about losing constant communication or emotional availability. It is about something more subtle and far more powerful: the disruption of control and familiar patterns. Many relationships operate according to predictable emotional rhythms. Over time, people learn how you respond to certain situations. They learn which words trigger your concern, which actions cause you to explain yourself, and which emotional pressures lead you to adjust your behavior. These patterns develop slowly, often without either person consciously noticing them. You respond in a certain way, they respond in another, and the interaction becomes routine. In some cases, these patterns create balance and understanding, but in other situations, they create subtle systems of influence where one person learns how to guide the emotional reactions of another. If you are someone who cared deeply about harmony and understanding, you may have responded strongly when conflict appeared. When someone criticized you, you explained your intentions carefully. When someone expressed disappointment, you worked hard to repair the relationship. When someone used guilt or emotional pressure, you tried to prove that you still cared. Over time, these responses created a predictable pattern. Certain individuals learned that your empathy could be used to guide your reactions. They understood that if they expressed frustration or disappointment strongly enough, you would eventually respond with reassurance or explanation. This pattern may not have been malicious at the beginning. It may have simply developed because your compassion made you responsive to other people's emotions. But once someone becomes accustomed to influencing your reactions, that influence quietly becomes part of the structure of the relationship. The moment your growth begins to change those reactions, the pattern breaks. When someone criticizes you now, you may simply listen without defending yourself endlessly. When someone attempts to provoke guilt, you may respond with calm clarity instead of emotional urgency. When someone tries to pull you into drama, your reaction may be silence rather than engagement. These changes may feel peaceful and balanced from your perspective, but for someone who is used to guiding your reactions, the difference feels unsettling. The familiar emotional pattern that once existed between you has disappeared. They say something expecting the old response, yet the response never arrives. The explanation they expected is replaced by calm acceptance. The emotional reaction they anticipated
is replaced by restraint.
In that moment, something important becomes clear to them, even if they cannot articulate it. Their influence over your reactions is fading. For individuals who relied on emotional leverage, this shift can feel threatening. When someone can no longer control how you respond, the dynamic of the relationship changes immediately. The strategies that once guided your behavior stop working. Guilt no longer produces the same urgency. Criticism no longer forces you to justify yourself endlessly. Emotional pressure no longer creates the same level of reaction. The sense of influence they once held over the relationship begins to weaken. In response to this loss of control, many people adopt a simple strategy. Instead of acknowledging that your reactions have changed, they redefine your character. They describe your calmness as coldness. They frame your restraint as indifference. They present your boundaries as a personality flaw rather than a sign of growth. This labeling becomes a subtle attempt to push you back into the old pattern. If they can convince you that your new behavior is wrong, they hope you will return to the earlier version of yourself that was easier to influence. But what they are actually witnessing is emotional maturity. Maturity often appears quieter than the earlier stages of emotional life. Instead of reacting immediately, you observe. Instead of defending yourself endlessly, you choose when a response is truly necessary. Instead of trying to manage everyone's feelings, you recognize that each person is responsible for their own emotional growth. These changes reduce the emotional turbulence that once defined certain relationships. Yet, to someone who depended on that turbulence to maintain influence, calmness can feel unfamiliar and threatening. They may attempt to provoke reactions in order to restore the old dynamic. When those attempts fail, the label of coldness becomes their explanation. What they cannot control anymore, they attempt to redefine. Yet, beyond the psychological patterns of control and influence, there is another layer to this transformation that runs even deeper. Growth is not only an emotional process. For many chosen ones, it is also a spiritual one. The calmness that replaces constant reaction often comes from a shift in perspective, a deeper alignment with wisdom and faith. And when that transformation begins, the changes in your behavior are not random adjustments. They are part of a refinement process that God uses to reshape your character and guide your life toward greater clarity and purpose. Chosen one. Beneath the emotional and psychological dynamics that people notice on the surface, there is often a deeper process unfolding in your life. What others interpret as distance or coldness may actually be part of a spiritual transformation that God is quietly working within you. Growth with God rarely appears loud or dramatic. In many cases, spiritual maturity develops through subtle changes in how you respond to the world around you. Situations that once triggered strong emotional reactions begin to feel less urgent. Conflicts that once consumed your attention start to lose their power over your thoughts. The constant need to explain yourself, defend your character, or prove your intentions gradually fades away. Instead of reacting immediately, you begin observing more carefully. Instead of speaking quickly, you begin choosing your words with intention. From the outside, this quieter way of living can appear unfamiliar to people who are used to the earlier version of you. They may interpret your calmness as indifference because they were accustomed to seeing you respond emotionally to every situation. Yet, what they are witnessing is often the result of spiritual refinement. When a person begins walking more closely with God, their inner perspective changes. The values that guide their decisions shift from constant reaction toward clarity and purpose. The Book of James offers a powerful principle about maturity when it encourages believers to be quick to listen and slow to speak. This wisdom reflects a deeper understanding of human behavior. Much of the conflict that fills daily life grows from impulsive words and emotional reactions. When someone learns to pause, listen carefully, and respond thoughtfully, the emotional turbulence around them begins to decrease. Silence replaces unnecessary arguments. Calmness replaces impulsive responses.
Discernment replaces the habit of engaging in every conflict that appears. To someone unfamiliar with this kind of maturity, the change can feel distant. They remember the earlier version of you who responded immediately to every comment or criticism. They were used to long conversations where you explained your thoughts in detail and tried to resolve every misunderstanding.
But spiritual growth often leads in the opposite direction. As wisdom develops, you begin recognizing which situations truly deserve your attention and which ones do not. You understand that not every criticism requires a defense, and not every conflict deserves a reaction. This awareness naturally reduces how often you speak, how quickly you respond, and how deeply you involve yourself in other people's emotional drama. For someone who expected constant emotional availability, this change can look like withdrawal. In reality, it is often the result of a heart that has become more centered and disciplined. God's process of refinement frequently teaches people how to guard their inner peace. When your life begins aligning with a deeper purpose, protecting your emotional and spiritual energy becomes essential. Without that protection, distractions and unnecessary conflicts can easily consume the attention needed to pursue the calling God is shaping within you. Guarding your heart does not mean losing compassion. It means understanding where your energy is best directed. Some conversations lead to growth and understanding. Others simply repeat the same patterns of misunderstanding again and again. Spiritual maturity allows you to recognize the difference. Instead of becoming entangled in every situation that demands your reaction, you learn to remain steady and focused on what truly matters. Over time, this steadiness creates a noticeable shift in how you move through life. You become less reactive, less eager to prove yourself, and more comfortable allowing silence to exist where explanations once filled the space. To people who expected the earlier version of you, this change can appear distant. They interpret your restraint as coldness because they were used to constant emotional engagement. But what they are witnessing is not the disappearance of your compassion. It is the development of discernment. Discernment allows you to care deeply without becoming consumed by every emotional demand placed on you. It allows you to remain compassionate while still protecting the clarity God is building within your life. Many chosen ones experience this transformation gradually as their faith deepens. They begin to realize that peace does not come from reacting to every situation, but from responding with wisdom. Their words become fewer because their understanding has grown stronger. Their silence becomes more frequent because they no longer feel responsible for correcting every misunderstanding. In this way, spiritual maturity often produces a calm presence that contrasts sharply with the emotional patterns of the past. To someone accustomed to constant engagement, that calmness can look like distance. Yet, the purpose of this refinement is not separation from people. It is alignment with truth. God reshapes the heart so that a person can live with greater clarity, stronger boundaries, and deeper peace. And when that process begins, the transformation may not always be recognized immediately by those around you. Some people will misinterpret your calmness as coldness, simply because they are unfamiliar with what spiritual maturity looks like in practice. But this misunderstanding leads to an important realization that eventually becomes clear to every chosen one. Peace and restraint are not signs of emotional distance. They are signs of growth. And when that growth becomes visible, it reveals a deeper strength that does not rely on constant reaction, but on clarity, wisdom, and purpose. Chosen one, when you step back and look at the entire journey of your transformation, something important begins to make sense. The label people place on your change was never really about your character. It was about the difference between who you used to be and who you are becoming. For a long time, you may have been someone who tried to maintain harmony at any cost. You responded quickly to messages, explained your intentions carefully, and carried emotional responsibility that was never truly yours to carry. You believed that being understanding meant being endlessly available, that kindness meant tolerating every form of misunderstanding, and that compassion required sacrificing your own peace
whenever conflict appeared. But growth slowly teaches a different lesson. It reveals that compassion without wisdom eventually becomes exhaustion. It shows that kindness without boundaries can be mistaken for permission. And it reminds you that protecting your peace is not an act of selfishness, but an act of maturity. When you begin living with that understanding, your behavior naturally changes. You speak less because you no longer feel the need to defend every misunderstanding.
You react less because you recognize that many conflicts resolve themselves when you refuse to feed them with emotional energy. You step back from certain situations because you realize that not every connection is meant to remain in the same form forever. To someone who is comfortable with the earlier version of you, these changes can feel confusing. They remember the person who always responded immediately, the one who absorbed tension and tried to repair every conflict. When that version of you begins to fade, they interpret the difference through the language that feels easiest for them. They call it coldness, because that explanation requires less reflection on their part. It allows them to believe the change happened within you rather than within the dynamic of the relationship itself. Yet the truth is far more balanced than that simple label suggests. Your transformation does not mean you have lost compassion. It means your compassion now operates alongside clarity. You still care about people, but you no longer allow caring to erase your boundaries. You still value connection, but you recognize that connection must exist within mutual respect. You still believe in patience, but you understand that patience should not become a permanent tolerance of unhealthy patterns. This balance is one of the most important signs of emotional and spiritual maturity. It allows you to remain kind without becoming overwhelmed by the expectations of others. When kindness exists without limits, it eventually leads to burnout. When kindness exists with wisdom, it becomes something stable and sustainable. For many chosen ones, this stage of growth marks a turning point in how they move through life. They stop measuring their worth by how available they are to everyone around them. They stop believing that peace requires constant explanation or endless emotional labor. Instead, they begin living with a deeper sense of clarity about what truly deserves their attention. Conversations become more intentional. Relationships become more balanced. Their emotional energy is directed toward purpose, rather than constant reaction. And while this shift may confuse some people at first, it eventually reveals something important about your character. Strength does not always appear through loud declarations or dramatic confrontation. Sometimes the strongest response is restraint. The ability to remain calm when others expect a reaction shows a level of self-control that few people truly develop. The ability to remain silent when explanations would only create more conflict reflects wisdom that grows through experience. And the ability to protect your peace without losing your compassion demonstrates a maturity that many people spend years trying to understand. God often shapes this kind of strength slowly, through situations that teach patience, discernment, and clarity. The experiences that once felt frustrating begin to reveal their purpose. Each misunderstanding becomes an opportunity to strengthen your boundaries. Each criticism becomes a reminder that your identity does not depend on how others interpret your growth. Over time, the label of coldness loses its power. You begin to see it for what it truly is, a reaction to change. People who preferred the earlier version of you may struggle to recognize the value of your transformation. But the purpose of growth was never to satisfy every expectation around you. It was to bring your life into alignment with truth, wisdom, and the direction God is shaping for your future. When you live from that alignment, your peace becomes steady even when others misunderstand it. And eventually, something remarkable happens. The same calmness that once seemed unfamiliar to others becomes the very thing that defines your strength. Because in a world where reactions are constant and emotional noise never stops, the quiet ability to remain grounded, thoughtful, and purposeful is one of the clearest signs that real growth has taken place. If this message resonated with you,
Take a moment to reflect on it. Growth often changes how people see you, but that does not mean the change is wrong. Sometimes protecting your peace and walking in the wisdom God is giving you will be misunderstood by those who preferred the old version of you. If this video helped you understand your journey more clearly, consider liking the video so this message can reach others who may be going through the same experience. You can also share it with someone who needs encouragement today. And if you want more content about the journey of the chosen ones, faith, and spiritual growth, subscribe and stay connected.